All right, we will get started. Thank you all for being here again with us. My name is Jerry Hawkins. I'm the Executive Director of Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation. And we're here to talk about our new report that will be here very soon. We will release an electronic version on the first week of November, and we will have some physical copies in some of our partner coffee shops in mid-November called A New Community Vision for Dallas. Our new community vision for Dallas is our way to communicate some of our community racial history information to our community. It is not our history, it is the community's history. And we need a more expansive community history in order to move into the racial equity space that we want to move into. So it is also not meant to be a more expansive version of history. This is also not the final version because there are people who are doing this amazing historical and archiving work that are in our community. And we're excited that we have some folks that are going to talk about that coming up very soon. So let's get started. Steph, you can go to the next. So again, we have to deal with this first public policy of Dallas County is that Dallas is on stolen land. This is Caddo Nation land. This is Wichita. This is the Comanche and several other folks. And we have to not only recognize and support our American Indian and Native and Indigenous people to this land, but also press the county and press the city to support them and to recognize them. We have right now a cabin that supports John Neely Bryan, who is the so-called founder of Dallas, when we know that that's not the truth. There were people here thousands of years before he settled and created what we know as Dallas. We also have to deal with this next public policy, which is that Dallas was built with stolen labor. Like many southern cities, Dallas also had slavery. When those white settlers cleared out the native folks who were here, American Indian people who were here, they brought with them enslaved Africans to do labor for free. They were property, they didn't have any rights, yet they did all of the labor, particularly agriculture, particularly building roads, and really doing labor without any compensation. So it's really important that we recognize that, and the afterlife of slavery, which include things like sharecropping, which produced in Dallas the world's largest inland cotton port. And that's a story we have to also continue to talk about, what harms were done because of slavery in Dallas County, and also what harms were done with the afterlife of slavery, which also include mass incarceration. So this is important. One thing that we always talk about, though, in our community is why this story is always a binary story. Why is a story about race always black and white? And there's a reason for that. Right after 1841, this battle at Village Creek near the Trinity River banks in Arlington, the only people who lived here were the people who settled this land, which were white settlers who were getting land grants from the Peters Colony, and their African slaves. By this time, those settlers had cleared out, massacred, and removed the American Indian folks who were living here. So it's really important that we understand that. And we also have to understand what came after that. What came after that was that Dallas had to be built now. And because of the end of slavery in 1865, folks knew that they needed more labor. And with the advent of the train and the end of the Mexican Revolution came a new group of people, particularly Mexican people who were immigrating, trying to get away from the violence that was happening in the Mexican Revolution, but also looking for a new way of life, a way to be safe, a way to build their family. And what they encountered here was more exploitation, particularly around labor. Dallas was built with exploited labor, and that labor was done exploitation was done to Latinx, Hispanic, Latino people here in Dallas. Continuing with their story, it's really important to know that during Jim Crow and after slavery and after Reconstruction, because of how racial hierarchies happen, Dallas also participated not only in subjugating and exploiting and hurting and harming Black people in this city, in this county. But now these newly immigrated Mexican people are also facing this similar discrimination. You can see here, this is from the Lone Star Restaurant Association in Texas, from Dallas, Texas. You can find this artifact at the African American Museum, but also some other local archives. You see this, and I'm always struck by this every time I see it. This kind of hierarchy, right? First they say no dogs, then no Negroes, which are Black people, and then no Mexicans, right? Make this very clear, and this sign was hung up in several restaurants. I'm going to talk about a story from Pancho Medrano, who said that him and his mom and his siblings could not eat in restaurants here in Dallas, that they would be served outside and had to sit on the hot concrete and eat their food. We don't know these stories that happen to Latinx, Hispanic, Latino people here in Dallas, and we need to do more research about that. Let's continue. And so as we start to discover more of these stories, I would love to talk to more people, and I'm glad that we have DMAHL with us. This is a map of Mexican-American neighborhoods and barrios from 1900 to 1970. How many of us knew that there were so many Mexican-American neighborhoods here in Dallas, right? We can start from the left. You see Eagle Ford and Ledbetter, and Cemento Grande and Cemento Chico, right? Cement City, those initial neighborhoods, which we're going to talk about later after the film, but also La Estrella and Los Altos and La Bajada, really La Loma, like so many neighborhoods. And obviously the most famous that we do know of is El Barrio, which is Little Mexico. But there's so many neighborhoods, and I am so happy to have representatives from DMAHL with us. We have with us now, I'm very excited to talk to them, Senora Rosemary Hinojosa and Victoria Ferrell here to talk with us. So thank you all for being with us, and hopefully they are here. So welcome you all. Thank you so much for being with us. Please tell us, either one of you all would love to know, tell us what is DMAHL, and why is it so important that folks learn about the work of DMAHL?
Okay, I can start, Mr. Hawkins.
And introduce yourself, please. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for having us. My name is Rosemary Hinojosa. I've been a board member of the Dallas Mexican American Historical League, or DMAHL, since we first began in since we were first founded in 2008. And our mission is to preserve the history of Mexican Americans in Dallas. We research, we collect, we document, and we preserve, educate the public on the historical and cultural experiences and contributions of Mexican Americans in Dallas, beginning from the early 1900s, as the barrio map showed. We honor and celebrate our authentic historical stories and depict the oppression, the marginalization, the displacement, and inequity faced by Mexican Americans in Dallas, primarily through historical photographic exhibits, videos and film arts, published books, and storytelling via oral interviews, speaker series, public presentations, historical bus tours, commemoration of cultural and historical events, and designation of historical landmarks. As I mentioned earlier, we were established in 2008, March. 6 months later, we hurriedly curated our first exhibit. It was tremendously successful with attendance numbering about 7,500, but the success was measured in far more than numbers. For example, Mexican American residents came up to the mall members and thanked us profusely for an exhibit that they had never seen on public display before. They could relate to it. We
Mhm.
overheard many of them calling their family members, their grandmas or their children, and telling them, come to the exhibit here. We see your picture. We see a picture of grandpa and his old baseball team in the 1940s.
Right.
We see groups, civic groups and religious groups come over and see this. And so it was the first time many of them had ever seen a photographic exhibit that included them, their family members, their barrios, and their history and contributions. One particularly poignant comment came from an elder who voiced that she never thought that she would see her photograph in a museum.
Wow.
So our work is a healing experience for Latinos. We've carried over 500 years of oppression and conquest on our bodies, our
Hmm.
minds, and our souls. And so the work of DMAHL, in a small measure, can help alleviate some of this historical trauma that we've been faced with for generations. And around 2010, I believe, Dr. Andrew Sandoval Strauss, who was then a professor at the University of New Mexico and now is at Penn State, he was visiting Dallas doing research on his book, Barrio America, which was recently published. And he told us that he attributed our success to the fact that we were telling our history from the bottom up. I
Mm.
didn't really know what that meant until he explained it a little further. It was the history that we were telling of the ordinary Mexican American barrio residents and community leaders who had been raised in the barrios or the neighborhoods. And it was incredibly relevant to them. They took ownership, especially since their barrios had either disappeared or were in the process of gentrification or demise. Of the 18 historical Mexican American barrios that you first saw in the map earlier, um, 12 have disappeared as a result of development, gentrification, displacement, or government indifference or intervention. 4 are currently at significant risk of demise: La Loma, La Bajada, Los Altos, and Ledbetter. Most DMAHL members have a deep connection to the barrios as original residents ourselves. For example, I'm a resident of Eagle Ford and Ledbetter. Lived there until 1974, I believe. Thereby, barrio residents that either still live in some of the barrios that are still in existence or once lived there, they have placed their confianza, in other words, their trust in the DMAHL organization as a gatekeeper of their narratives. So DMAHL aims to change from a deficit-based narrative around immigration, race, and poverty into a strength-based perspective. We want to replace prevalent and stereotypical perceptions with positive, authentic narratives that promote social change and well-being. We have many assets in our Latino community. Our most valuable human assets are our elders that hold our history, culture, and heritage in their hearts and their minds, and our young, who we want to inspire and mentor to become the future storytellers and gatekeepers. And so by sharing cross-generational and create cultural and social equity by memorializing our stories, telling history, in other words, from the bottom up. So the stories, the photographs, and all related materials become assets themselves. And so we form a lot of relationships with our partners, with community collaborators, and those are assets. The historical landmarks are assets to generate dialogue on Mexican American history in Dallas, and marginalization, discrimination, social equity, and yet resilience in the face of immense obstacles. Our Spanish language and immigration connect first generation with those who immigrated years ago. Indeed, the immigrant story is a collective experience upon which we can build greater unity with a broader population, because it's not just a story that we want to tell to our own people. It's a story that we want to tell to the general population, because it's a story that's been untold or skewed by the white perspective, by the white perspective of what our Mexican American history is like. Finally, the proximity of Texas to Mexico with shared history and frequent traffic between Mexican Americans and Mexicans serves as another asset for additional historical stories and binational collaborative ventures. Finally, we're recruiting and mentoring the younger generation. They are members of our new initiative, which we call the Emerging Historians of DMAHL. Primarily first generation young adults ages 20 to 40. They have similarly experienced the cycle of immigration and its social and economic impact. They've moved into the areas of Dallas that had become predominantly minority as a result of white flight in the 1960s, and they're advocating to include them, for example, Oak Cliff and Pleasant Grove, as additional historical barrios. The three major goals we have for the emerging historians of DMAHL are: number one, to secure young professionals and college students as future leaders of DMAHL. Number two, to prepare them for board leadership on DMAHL and civic leadership on historical and cultural boards and commissions where Latino voices are either underrepresented or totally lacking. This is where the decision making, we feel, decision making powered by persons who understand issues of equity is critical. And three, finally, we look to them for DMAHL's continued growth as an innovative historical and cultural organization and the leading voice of Dallas's Mexican American history. And that's where we find Victoria Ferrell Ortiz, our next speaker, as one of our emerging historians, and now serves on our board, as well as on the City of Dallas Cultural Affairs Commission, Cultural Arts Commission. So that's kind of a history of DMAHL in a nutshell. You know, we strive to tell our history because no one has told it before. And we tell this history, as Dr. Strauss mentioned, from the bottom up, because that is our history. And that's what we feel has made us successful. There's plenty of stories of the upper class, the well-to-do, the white privileged, as well as the Mexican privileged. But there's not been too many stories at all of the ordinary Mexican Americans who have contributed, as you mentioned, Mr. Hawkins, earlier, have contributed greatly through their hard work, their labor, their sacrifice to building the city of Dallas and to our society in general. So again, thank you for having us here.
No, that was amazing. I have so many questions for you, but I want to introduce Victoria. I'm going to come back to you. Victoria, please also introduce yourself and give us an introduction to this Emerging Historians, which is so exciting as an initiative of DMAHL. We've partnered with one of the Emerging Historians, Priscilla Escobedo. But she's an amazing archivist at UTA, and she helps us out a lot. So, please introduce yourself and tell about your work.
Yeah, so my name is Victoria Ferrell Ortiz. I was connected through DMAHL in 2017 whenever one of my grandparents was placed in a memory care facility. It was a huge wake-up call to me to record my oral history because there were stories there that I had no idea. or underlighting. And it's something that I want to pass on to others, because your ancestral history is something that's personal and so touching, and it's something that you cannot learn from a classroom from a teacher. It's something you have to get from the source, like Rosemary was saying, from the bottom up. So you have to go and talk to your loved ones in order to receive that blessing, to receive those stories. And so I'm happy to have joined DMAHL as a board member, but also very excited about being an emerging historian. I was one of their first members of their cohort. And so like Rosemary said, we're a group of young professionals assembled by Rosemary in order to pass on the legacy of preserving our local history to the next generation. And so right now, some of the things that the emerging historians are working on are the Chronicles of Dallas Barrios podcast. And in that podcast, we are highlighting the impact of COVID on BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, artists, and businesses in our first season. And so far, we've interviewed Jessica Washington of the Dallas Weekly, Ofelia Faz Garza. She's a cultural artist here in Oak Cliff, and David Lozano of Garamia Theater. Right now, those episodes are on our DMAHL website, DMAHL.org. We're figuring out the hosting platforms, and so they'll be there soon as well. But also, we're, another group of the emerging historians are working on creating a curriculum in which they teach participants how to record, gather up those oral histories, so that way they're not put in a position that I was, where someone's placed in a memory care facility, and so some of those stories are partially lost. And so I'm really excited to find out and watch what they make there. Our Twitter and Instagram handle is at DMAHL Official, if you'd like to follow us there.
Awesome. We'll put it in the chat. That's amazing work. Really excited about that. I want to go back to Rosemary for a minute. You said so many important things. What are a few important things, particularly from the undertold and untold stories of the Mexican American community here in Dallas that folks should know as we are learning more about our city? What are some things that we should know?
Well, one of the things was mentioned earlier in an earlier segment, and that is that our people's hard labor helped to build Dallas. The people that worked in the cement companies, there were two major cement companies in Dallas, the Trinity Portland Cement Company and the Lone Star Cement Company. And the workers worked hard hours, some 7 days a week, long hours, to help the expansion of Dallas. And so that's one of those stories. The others is the manufacturing industry. All along West Dallas, like on Singleton, you saw manufacturing industry come in as early as the early 1900s. Many Mexican Americans went to work there, for example, company at Atlas Metal Works. And so they were also primarily helping the manufacturing industry in Dallas. In fact, there was, I think it was in the 1920s, there was an advertisement in the Dallas newspaper that said that the business interest of Dallas had a new campaign ad. And the ad stated something like more smokestacks for the Southwest. And so that was the history of Dallas business, and yet it was environmental history too, environmentally damaging to the Mexican Americans and the African Americans that lived in West Dallas, which was the area of most of the manufacturing and cement companies. So that's one story. The other story we told of civil rights injustice. In 2013, we always theme our exhibits to a commemoration or an anniversary. So in 2013 was the 40th anniversary of the killing 12-year-old Santos Rodriguez by Dallas police officer Daryl Kane. And so we wanted to tell the history of the civil rights from 1920 to 2013 or 2012, 2013 obviously, with Santos being the focal point of that. We had a newspaper story that showed that in 1920, a group of 200 Mexicans went to City Hall and appealed to the then mayor to help them find work because they were destitute. There was no work. And the mayor promised that he would look into maybe opening up temporary jobs for them so that they could, provide for their families. Many of them had already gone back to Mexico, but some of them didn't have even the money for the train fare. So anyway, the interesting thing is that 1 week later, Anglo workers went and appealed to the mayor, give me those jobs. So you can kind of guess who got the jobs. And then a third thing that we wanted to show is the contribution of our military veterans and the families, because the families sacrificed just as much as the veterans. So in 2015, we had the most beautiful exhibit, and we called it The Untold Story, a tribute to Mexican American veterans and their families. From World War I, we had 5 photographs that we were given of World War I soldiers, all the way to Iraq and Afghanistan. Beautiful exhibit where we showed the sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice by many of them that they made in the service to our country. So those are the untold stories that we want to share, not with just Mexican American audiences, but with the general public, because it's the general public that needs to know about our contributions also. So that's a little bit of some of the things that we've done.
No, thank you. It's very important work. And we know that a lot of our community members have been supporting the work of Santos Vive and some of the other projects that have come out of the work of DMAHL and other organizers. Victoria, what's next for DMAHL, and how can folks find out and be involved and support the work that DMAHL is doing?
Well, I think one way is to become a member of DMAHL, and so I saw that you shared our website, and that's a great way to support us and our work. I think right now Rosemary is actually doing a Dia de los Muertos campaign where she's organizing some students to send in their pictures of their loved ones. So also think about your own personal history, and if you have like those ties to some of the original barrios or some of the new barrios, like Rosemary was talking about, Oak Cliff and Pleasant Grove, and you've found like wonderful family photos, we'd love to be able to share and archive those photos. So getting a hold of us and allowing us to submit those to our collection is a great way to support DMAHL. And as far as our future, we're growing. I see that the emerging historians are going to continue to step up and step out into the community, into Dallas, and continue doing this work. So whatever that looks like, we'll adapt and change along the way.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for being with me today, this morning, as we continue to tell the stories of our community and to highlight organizations like DMAHL and others who are doing this most important work of saving our stories for our elders and for our next generation. We really appreciate you and look forward to working with you some more. We also want to announce right now that we will, TRHT, Dallas TRHT, will be making a contribution to the emerging historians. So we will be sharing more about that later, but we look forward to supporting your work more in the future.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you all. We will continue on our presentation, and we have a great film to show, but we want to share more about our Mexican American and also our Latinx, Latino, and Hispanic community here in Dallas. As a person who has lived in a Northwest barrio since I've lived in Dallas, which is Bachman Lake, I know that the people are resilient, they are brilliant, talented, and we need to learn more about our Latinx, Latino, Hispanic brothers and sisters. Starting with El Barrio, which is the grandest of the barrios, is what we call Little Mexico. Little Mexico started in this area. You can see it is a large, very significant area. It spanned from what we know as downtown all the way up to uptown, all the way even west that touched Freemanstown. It's a huge part of our city, and we need to recognize it. It's really important also to know that this barrio, Little Mexico, started off as Little Jerusalem. It was a Jewish community, immigrants, and once those Jewish folks moved out during the 1910s and 20s, it was populated by newly immigrated folks who were looking for opportunity and finding it here in Dallas through work. But they also brought their amazing culture and amazing food. It's really important to know that businesses like El Phoenix and Luna Tortillas and so many other businesses started in Little Mexico. You can go to the next slide. We also want to talk about St. Anne. St. Anne is a school, very historic school that is one of the few, and I say this with no qualms, one of the few historical buildings that is still standing. It used to be a school in Little Mexico. Now it is a restaurant. I actually ate brunch there, and it was pleased to see that at least the building and some of the historical artifacts in St. Anne have been preserved. But you can see students here, particularly these are all of the young ladies and girls who were educated at St. Anne. Next slide. And it's a very important thing happened, obviously. This is Pike Park. Pike Park was the center of Little Mexico for decades. But the advent of Santos Rodriguez, who is a very important story, a young boy who was killed by Officer Dale Crane after he played Russian roulette with him and his brother in the car. And Daryl Kane was the first officer in Dallas County convicted of murder. Santos' story has lived in the hearts of not only local folks from Little Mexico, but Dallasites who were awake by this story. And recent times, Santos was commemorated by the city of Seattle, and they created a park in his name, while Dallas hadn't even recognized or apologized for his death. A few years ago, Mayor Mike Rawlings finally apologized to the mother of Santos, Bessie Rodriguez, and the city and the park board has now named the rec center at Pike Park, Santos Rodriguez Center at Pike Park. So, things are being recognized. But before we talk about, Little Mexico, you have to talk about Cement City. Here's pictured as some of the first structures being built in Cement City. Cement City was also built on top of what was a former French settlement called La Reunion. Once businesses realized that there were limestone deposits and chalk deposits in the ground, they started to create cement companies that would later go on to employ Mexican immigrants that built our city, built the bridges over the Trinity River, and built roads and highways. It's very important. Next slide. Here's pictures Henry Rodriguez and his brother Cement City was literally a city. It was an incorporated city by itself. The people who lived here still think about this area fondly. And this area is also still here. The cement cemetery, you can see the next slide, is buried in the back of AT&T's offices in West Dallas. And the graveyard has now shrunk to a very small a surface area. There are reports that there are people buried underneath the parking lot at AT&T. Like I said, really powerful story. If Victoria is still here, she was featured in the film. Victoria, can you tell your experience about, just number one, just the film, first of all, your first reactions after seeing it? I'm sure you've seen it before, but also, your reactions after, collecting some of the stories of your grandmother and hearing about some of the exploitive ways in which folks are trying to take people's homes and their land. Share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was just beautifully done. Sara and everyone there with Teatro Dallas did an amazing job. Tropic Pictures, kudos. And thinking specifically about the way that our elders are targeted by developers is really disturbing to me, because they're part of our most vulnerable populations. And yet my abuela is a seamstress, and she comes from a family that were workers on Cemento Grande. And in my speaking earlier, my paternal grandmother is the one that was placed into a memory care facility. So I went over to my maternal grandmother, who is my abuela, and asked her to share some of her stories with me for the first time. And she said that she was a cementera, and I don't speak Spanish. My Spanish isn't very good. So I had to ask her, what does that mean to you? And she's like, well, my people are the people of Cemento Grande. And I had no idea. I was like 25 at the time, and it was the first time that I ever knew that there was a Cemento Chico, Cemento Grande, Lone Star, Portland Cement Company. And it was just like world shaking, lineage crossing, amazing stuff.
I can imagine.
But hearing the way and knowing the way that my grandma isn't the only person who is receiving like these solicitations, and really being badgered by these quote unquote offers that are just not really matching the investment that someone as a homeowner might have put into the house in their time living there. But also, like I said, 30 grand, she wouldn't be able to move anywhere in Dallas for 30 grand. And because she's just never had that kind of money all at once before, 30 grand in her mind is like, wow, that's amazing. Think of the things I could do with that. But because she's kind of like disconnected and not well informed about like our property values, I'm sure there are people out there that take offers that are so low and really get gypped and taken advantage of, ripped off, all of those things. It makes me really sad for them, because not everybody has a family or someone to ask like, hey, should I consider this even? Should I take this? And it's just disturbing the way that some developers go about doing their business.
No, for sure. Thank you for joining again and sharing that very personal story. It's also part of the work that we need to do, and I think very boldly, is to protect particularly our people of color, our elders who have been living there for so long, to make sure that they stay in their homes and that they don't have to pay for those homes, particularly if they've contributed, like your abuela has, to so much of our community and society. So thank you again to Victoria and Rosemary and to DMAHL. So yeah, we'll continue our presentation. We have just a little bit more because we want to just share a little bit that that'll be talked about in the report, including some of the folks that we need to know. One of those people is Pancho Medrano. I was surprised by a story that I was told, particularly that folks didn't know about Pancho Medrano. He is one of the most important Dallasites to happen here, and he was a boxer, a young organizer around labor issues and civil rights issues, but also expanded his reach through Texas and the rest of the country. You see him pictured here with Cesar Chavez, but Pancho was an amazing guy. Let's go to the next slide. Pancho started off growing up in Little Mexico. He was born in Dallas at the start of Little Mexico, and matriculated through some schools and became a boxer after he joined his labor union, and was actually that was the start of his activism. He noticed that his people very particularly were fighting these battles over labor, and he wanted to make sure that those labor laws can be protected by a strong union, and particularly for Mexican-American workers. Pancho also identified as a Chicano, which is more language that we need to learn about the politics within the Latino community in the early and mid 1900s. You can go to the next slide. Here's Pancho doing some solidarity work with folks like A. Maceo Smith, who is to his left. Asa Maceo Smith is one of the most important Dallasites. We're also going to talk about in the report as well. But Pancho had a lot of stories. One of the stories was that he was considered by some white residents so dark that they thought he was a black man, and that he would get discriminated. He tells a story about not being able to swim in Pike Park, that the white kids swim in Pike Park. And so he had to go, him and his friends had to go all the way to Freedmanstown, which was right next to Little Mexico, to walk. And it's a long walk away from where he was living. He also told stories about, working to abolish things like the poll tax. And you see this language. The interesting thing is that like the defund language and the abolish language has reemerged, but you can see very clearly in this sign that word abolish has been around for generations, and folks like Pancho and A. Maceo Smith have been working to end some of these very racist policies for a long time. And next slide. There's now a school named after Pancho Medrano here in the Bachman Lake Webb Chapel area. I've been to the school. It's a very beautiful, huge middle school, and really glad that it's there to celebrate the legacy of Pancho. Pancho has great murals in here, and one of his family members, Adam Medrano, is now a city councilman. Go to the next slide. One of my favorite Dallasites, period, that people should know more about is Adolfo Caello. She is a powerhouse, and she's had so many amazing quotes about who she was. First of all, she was a lawyer. It's really important to know that she became the first Hispanic woman to graduate from law school at SMU. She was 37 at the time, and one of only 3 women to graduate from law school. She couldn't even get a job as a lawyer after law school. She only can get what she called a legal secretary job. And so she was like, I'm a Mexican American woman with a law degree from SMU. And so she started her own practice and became very successful and very wealthy. And then with her wealth, she was able to be very vocal in a lot of issues in Dallas, including about Santos Rodriguez and the city council redistricting, and still to Farmers Branch's policies against illegal immigration in 2006 as a older person. Her influence was so broad that she was called La Madrina, or the godmother, and she referred to herself as the millionaire militant in reference that her wealth bolstered her independence. So just a powerhouse woman. Go to the next slide. You can see her here, picture with Domingo Garcia and Al Lipscomb and some of the other folks, you know, fighting for, you know, rights of people. Go to the next slide. You see her here at the immigration march with our state senator, and also there's going to be a statue of her in Main Street Garden. Really looking forward to seeing that when it's posted. And there's also a school. I actually did some programming at the school named after her in Pleasant Grove, and it's a really beautiful campus. And she was there to see the opening of that campus before she passed. So really awesome about that. And we also have to talk about Anita Martinez, who you know, just did so much for the Latino community here in Dallas. You can go to the next slide. She was the first Hispanic Latina elected to the city council. During this was, you know, it was just amazing, you know, to happen after all of the things that had happened during city council. And go to the next slide. She also founded the Anita N. Martinez Ballet Folklorico, who was, you know, renowned all over the country for their dances, and that company is still dancing to this day. If you are connected to the city, you can, you know, try to get their services if they're not booked up already. Next slide. And then the Dirty Dozen, which included Adolfo Caello, and also, you know, a bunch of now very powerful Latinos in the city of Dallas who are pushing for not only rights in the Mexican American community, but civil rights all over Dallas. And the next slide. This included Renee Martinez, who is still here with us and still organizing. Me and Amber were still just on a call with him very recently, but he is also a very historic figure in the city of Dallas. Was on the commission to build the first magnet school in the United States. Has done a lot of great work. So next slide. This is the end of our report. This report will be out in the first week of November. We'll release an electronic version first. And again, the very social distance physical copy will be in some of our partner coffee shops, including Union Coffee and Mocha Coffee. So thank you all for being with us today. We really appreciate it. We want you to sign up for our website if you don't are not signed up for our newsletter. We want you to check out our resources, follow us on social media, and if you have any questions, email us at dallastrht.org. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate you being with us, and we will talk to you soon.